Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. The talk this morning is going to be about Sir Arthur Russell and his wonderful mineral collection, which now resides at the Natural History Museum in London. I'm sure that many of you will have heard of Sir Arthur Russell, but perhaps you don't know too much about the man or how his fine collection came into being. And I hope that in about an hour's time, you're going to feel that you know him a whole lot better. A little bit of geography. This is obviously the UK, and we're going to start down in the southeast of England, which is where Sir Arthur was born and where he spent most of his life. Zooming in a bit, here's London, and the four things that I'm drawing attention to are, first of all, Folkestone down in the southeast. He was born in this house here at Clifton Crescent, overlooking the sea. His later life was spent at the family estate at Swallowfield Park, out to the west of London, near Reading. And because Swallowfield was close to London, he was able to build very close relationships with people at the British Museum, now known as the Natural History Museum, and also the Mineralogical Society, which was then based at Burlington House in Piccadilly. So all of these things really pull together to help Arthur in how he develops his life and his interests. I'd like to pay tribute briefly to these three guys. The two on the left, some of you will have heard of, possibly even have met, Peter Embry and Bob Symes, both at the Natural History Museum. And on the right, Bob King. Again, some of you may possibly have known Bob. And he was the founder of the Russell Society and a friend of Sir Arthur's. And all of these people have been quite influential in sort of seeding my interest. They're all friends of mine. And really, I want to say thank you to them for all the conversations and discussions that I've had over many years. So let's turn our attention now to Sir Arthur. He was born in 1878, died 1964, and he had the title of 6th Baronet of Swallowfield Park. He was, I think, probably the greatest British mineral collector of the 20th century. And I would liken him to the Mounties in always getting their man. He was very single-minded and determined. He spent a lot of time hunting down old collections, selecting material from them to incorporate into his own. And the list at the bottom of the slide there just gives you some idea of a few. There are something like 40 significant collections, some of which have now been assimilated into Sir Arthur's collection. So let's go back to Folkestone and look at the house on Clifton Crescent. His family lived in the near half of this building here. It still stands today. And his mum and dad were Sir George Russell, the 4th Baronet, and Lady Constance Russell, who was also known affectionately as Mayno in the family. And she was a very interesting person and a historian and researcher in her own right. As we go through the first set of slides, excuse me, you'll see this yellow tick mark on the timeline move along and just help you to frame where we are in the overall story. So here's a nice picture of a young Arthur, perhaps aged 7 or 8. We know that he went underground at Wheal Providence near St Ives in Cornwall. He had a fairly normal sort of upbringing. He went to prep school and then on to Eton College. He didn't enjoy his time at Eton at all due to bullying and the general culture of the place. And then from there, he progressed to go to King's College, the University of London, and he began studying what was probably a science course, but unfortunately, no records, the details survive. However, he had to end his course prematurely. He left without any qualifications when his father, Sir George Russell, died, and Sir Charles Russell, his elder brother, became the 5th Baronet. Charles was an invalid from birth and needed quite a lot of help and support, and so Arthur decided that he would abandon his college education. He also took a job with the South Eastern and Chatham Railway. So looking at here, we can see the family group. So Arthur is seated on the left. This is his first wife, Aileen, their daughter, little Bettine. This is Charles, his elder brother, and you can see he's standing slightly awkwardly with a stick. And this is Lady Constance Russell, Arthur's mother, and you can see Swallowfield in the background. And she produced a really fascinating book, which if you're interested to learn more about the family and the house, you can get a copy off the internet, Swallowfield and its owners, published in 1901. So shortly after that, Arthur was elected to membership of the Mineralogical Society, which must have been quite something for him as a young man, no formal qualifications. And in 1904, he married his first wife, Aileen, who's pictured. They had their first child the following year. And Arthur was out and about. We know that he was collecting at Tulmine Grisial, a famous locality for brookite and anates up in North Wales. And his field notes record the fact that after considerable blasting, many fine specimens were obtained. That same year, he made his first acquisition of the collection of John Hawkins, famous Cornishman. And that began a long series of sort of tracking down old collections and acquisitions over the remainder of his life. In 1907, so only 5 years after joining the MinSoc, he was elected to serve as a member of the council. And this would have brought him into close contact with many of the leading people of the day, so sort of academics, museum researchers, curators, and so on, most of whom would have had titles or qualifications. So it must have been quite daunting for Mr. Arthur Russell to sit amongst that group of people. Their second child was born in 1908. And the following year, he made another significant acquisition, the collection of Howard Fox of Cornwall, another famous Cornish family. And there were 3 Fox family collections, and Arthur made it his business to acquire them all over a period of time. In 1909, we know he was collecting in Shropshire with G.J. Williams. And G.J. Williams was the Inspector of Mines and Quarries for the Midlands, Wales, and the Isle of Man. And he became a very good friend. And for something like 10 years, he and Arthur did a lot of work together. And because Williams's job was to get into working mines and quarries and see what was happening, he was able to provide really up-to-date first-hand knowledge to Arthur to say, I was up at Lanrose today, you should go and have a look in the bottom level. So really useful contact for Arthur in pursuit of his interest. The family estate at Swallowfield Park was a very grand building. Originally it had something like 2,000 acres of land surrounding it. And the upper 2 pictures show it in somewhat of a rundown state around about 1964 when it was sold following Arthur's death. And the lower 2 pictures are taken from Constance Russell's book, Swallowfield and its Owners, and show the interior back in its heyday, you know, just bedecked with sort of fine furniture and treasures, paintings, all sorts of objects of art. Today, Swallowfield Park survives, and the people that now look after it and manage it have done a fantastic job. It dates back to 1678 and still has about 25 acres of remaining parkland around it. It was purchased in 1820 by Sir Henry Russell, and it stayed in the Russell family for over 100 years until it was ultimately sold to the Mutual Households Association and subsequently divided into apartments. So let's go back to collecting in the field and what sort of Arthur was pursuing in terms of interests and activities. So in 1911, he purchased the collection of Edmund Pierce. He was a doctor in Tavistock in the southwest of England, and he had a very good collection of minerals from Virtuous Lady Mine, and this collection really provided the foundation for a significant paper which Arthur read and subsequently published in the Min-Mag on an account of the minerals found in the Virtuous Lady Mine near Tavistock. And I'm sure you'll all be familiar with ladies' slippers and boxes and their unusual quartzes and siderite and so on. Around this time, he also made a trip to Italy, which was a mixture of mining and mineralogical activities. Not clear why that was, whether that was actually something he tried to earn some money on, whether it was just a holiday, or perhaps he was looking to acquire material that he could later sell to fund his own collecting. But in 1912, we saw another collection come into his sights, and he purchased a selection of material from Isaac Walker's collection. This is being handled by the mineral dealer Samuel Henson in London. And Isaac Walker had an extraordinarily good collection. He was a London brewer, clearly a very wealthy man, and a lot of very fine specimens survive today. And then World War I came along, somewhat disrupted all the plans and all the activities. And Arthur was very much a pacifist. He didn't like violence. He was very much a lover of animals, perhaps a little squeamish. And he volunteered for the Red Cross, and he served as an ambulance driver in France and Belgium. And I say the Red Cross because there's no evidence that it was the Army Medical Corps. And we know that he was driving an early Rolls-Royce ambulance. But he didn't survive very long. He was invalided home in 1915. And we know that that is the case because he was collecting underground in North Wales and Anglesey, again with G.J. Williams that year. And later that year, he purchased a collection of William Semmons, who was a metal broker. And then he obviously had a sort of think about where he was going, and he decided he would go back and he would enlist with the Royal Engineers with a preference for working in the railway division. And that was going to be the plan until in 1917, circumstances changed. His friend G.J. Williams was in touch with the guy who was running the Ministry of Munitions, and the suggestion was made that Arthur could be of great value to the country with his knowledge of mineral resources. And so he was seconded to the Mineral Resources Development branch of the Ministry of Munitions, and he spent the remainder of the war advising and visiting mines. So almost on a government-sponsored mineral collecting extravaganza. After the war, we see that he starts to develop an interest and expertise in goniometry and crystal drawing. I don't have time this morning to go into this in any detail, but many of you will be familiar with the rudiments of the process. You mount the specimen on a needle and you orientate different faces, measure the angles between them. And from that, through a rather laborious and exacting process, you can construct a crystal sketch like this. And Arthur became very expert. But sadly, in 1920, his first wife, Aileen, died of cancer. And that must really have put him in a very difficult position. So a young man, no secure income, a big estate to look after, and 2 young children. But minerals kept him going, and later that year he made an offer of £76 for the collection of Warrington Wilkinson Smythe, who was a famous mining geologist and collector. But the collection was not for sale at that time. And he was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, as recognition for his service during the war on mineral deposits. Another collection came his way. This was the second Fox family collection, that of George Croker Fox. And in 1922, he also managed to acquire the very large collection of Baroness Angela Burdett Coutts, which reportedly was not in a very good curatorial state. And there had been several other potential purchasers who turned it down. But I think Arthur managed to get it for a bargain price, and it kept him supplied in duplicates for some considerable amount of time. And indeed, many of the Russell collection duplicates that you see on the market say from the collection of Baroness Angela Burdett Coutts. So he was obviously feeling lonely. He needed a partner. He had 2 young children, and he perhaps jumped rather quickly into a relationship with his second wife, Cornelie de Bruyn. She was Dutch. They got married in Amsterdam. Sadly, it really wasn't a success. So this is Corrie sitting down on the steps. There was a huge age difference between them, and clearly it was not going to work, and they parted company. And it took about 10 years before a divorce was granted and Arthur was able to get on with his life again. But I'll point out here the classic trilby hat and his pipe, and the fact that he's wearing breeches and long socks and walking boots. And this was his standard attire for almost every occasion, unless he was going up to London for some formal meeting, when he would wear a suit. So in 1923, that marriage produced his 3rd child, Mervyn Russell, later Sir Mervyn Russell. And after the war, he then went on to progress to purchase a whole series of other collections. Firstly, a portion of the Philip Rashley collection, which had been passed down through a branch of the family to Arthur Rashley in Malvern Wells in Worcestershire. He was also possibly almost first in the whole in terms of the John Ruskin collection, where he purchased quite a tranche of that from Joan and Arthur Severn up in the Lake District. And in 1924, he was successful in acquiring the collections of J.H. and H.F. Collins, so famous West Country mining geologists and mineralogists. And from the north of England, the collection of John Piers Walton, who was closely associated with Fallowfield Mine. So things were really getting back onto a roll mineralogically. He was off to Portugal in 1924. And in 1925, his mum died. This must have been a really significant event because she had been such a big part of his life for such a long time. But in 1925, his mum died. And that same year, he headed off to Spain. So quite a bit of international activity, which is quite interesting and something that might bear further research in the future. In 1926, the Mineralogical Society was celebrating its jubilee, and he was invited to become director of the Southern Field Excursion. And this rather nice photo at the bottom here shows the party. at Roche Rock, which is a tourmalinised dike down in Cornwall. And those must have been great fun, driving around in groups of motor cars or a motor coach, visiting mines and quarries and just generally chatting about minerals. Later that year, he purchased the collection of David Bain, and again, this was a very high quality protection collection. The family were involved in brass manufacture and in shipping down in Cornwall. And when I've been going through the Russell collection, I've been struck how often, when I look at a drawer of specimens and think which one would make a good image for photography purposes, as a David Bain specimen is often the case. And then in 1927, he succeeded ultimately in getting the collection of Warrington, Wilkinson, Smythe, and that had been quite a tortuous process for him. And one of the things that I really wanted to include in the book was a picture of the mineral room at Swallowfield, because it features so strongly in all the thoughts and stories and the visits that had occurred over the years. But sadly, it seems that nobody actually took a photo, or if they did, I have not been able to find it, or they haven't survived. So the next best thing was to create a drawing. And I sat down with Christopher Russell and sort of interviewed him over a number of different sessions. We pieced together his recollections of the room. The cabinets survive at the Natural History Museum. We know quite a lot of the other details, and I was able to get the dimensions of the room from Swallowfield. And so from a sort of schoolboy perspective drawing, I was then looking around, how could I get this converted into something presentable for publication? And quite by chance, I learned that the wife of a friend of mine, Pippa Sweeney, was an expert pen and ink artist, and Pippa very kindly agreed to take on the task and produce this wonderful work of art. And Christopher Russell said he could almost smell the smoke from the fire. It was so realistic. So thank you very much, Pippa. Now, in addition to minerals, Arthur had many other interests: wildlife, trees, motor cars. He was essentially very interested in everything that was around him. And in 1928, he was an early adopter. He purchased the spare Riley 9 Brooklands model racing car, which is this rather fine vehicle at the top. And this was something that he drove all the way to the north of Scotland. The following year, he got involved in the occurrence of gold at Hope's Nose. This had been found originally by Professor Gordon from the University of London, and Russell picked it up and really sort of made it his own. I'm sure some of you will have specimens of this rather beautiful arborescent gold that's been etched out of the calcite matrix. Later that year, he got the third Fox family collection. You remember that I said there were three, and he purchased that for £22. And by this time, he had been seriously acquiring material for getting on for 30 years, and he had a huge mountain of surplus stuff. And so we saw the beginning of a major period of specimen sales to collectors. And this included people like Lazard Khan of Carnite, Hugh Alex Ford, who was the consul in Boston in the USA, Nere Boubet in Paris, and Henry Dewey of the Geological Survey in the UK. And so he was building up quite an entourage. And it came as quite a surprise to me, the extent of his mineral dealing and his commercial activities, something that I had not really appreciated at all previously. So he was now free to look for another partner. The divorce had gone through, separated from Corrie. And he had a friend who I think he possibly met through amateur dramatics in the Reading area. And this is Marjorie on the right. You can see next to the car, Marjorie Rudman. And so life was starting to sort of settle down a bit. He had been doing a lot of research on the history of British mineral collectors and dealers, and we saw him read a series of papers at the MinSoc. In 1932, he had a real bonanza collecting these very unusual calcite straws, something that I've got a project running on at the moment that I hope to publish in due course. And in 1933, he, together with his brother, Sir Charles, hosted a sort of garden party for 24 members of MinSoc at Swallowfield, and for them to come and see Arthur's mineral collection. And this is possibly the first time when that group would have actually been made aware of or met Marjorie. And Marjorie was only 27 when she married Arthur. So again, a big age difference. So moving on from that, he was now at a point where he had a very substantial collection. The collection was appreciated by his peers, and people had been coming from all over the world to see it. And he was starting to give consideration to what would happen to it upon his ultimate demise. And he floated the idea that he would like the collection to go to the British Museum of Natural History. And plans were laid, and there the matter just sat for a while. And in 1936, he came across a very good find of kyanite up in Scotland. The specimen on the right here is about 1 foot long, 30 centimetres. And his fourth child, Christopher Russell, from marriage number 3, was born in 1937. And Christopher has been absolutely of pivotal importance in the whole project and the research, and has thoroughly enjoyed being involved. Later that year, he acquired more specimens from the Edward Wilton Newton collection. He was an instrument manufacturer, and also Arthur Pierce Jenkin, who was a surveyor, both down in Cornwall. And in the back end of that year, in 1937, he collected some really outstanding apple green fluorites. This is one from St. Peter's Mine in East Allendale. And these are quite exquisite and fairly uncommon on the market. You'd be doing very well to find one of these. And then in 1938, he was honoured by the publication of the paper Russellite, a new British mineral, published by Max Hay and Bannister. And this picture on the right is sort of gravel. This comes off the separating tables at the Castle Andinus mine that was never found in situ. And then in 1939, I would consider probably at the peak of his mineralogical career, he was elected president of the Mineralogical Society on the 9th of November. So still at this time, he was plain Mr. Arthur Russell with no qualifications and no degree. So I think we can say that he was now moving into a period of settling down. He was still working hard at his mineral collecting. He purchased the collection of Lady Elizabeth Ann Cox Hippersley in 1940. She had a very fine old collection. She used to be based at Stowe in Somerset, sorry, Ston Easton in Somerset. And he'd been tracking this collection for a long time. It had been acquired via the Mechanics Institute in Somerset by his friend R.T. Gunter, who was at Ashmolean. Gunter had kept it for himself, and Arthur had aspirations to get hold of this when Gunter died. And indeed, when Gunter died, he was straight in there talking to the executors, saying this had been more or less promised to me. And the receipt that you see here is the £20 that he paid for it. So that was a very good day's work when he got hold of that. And then in 1941, he started to pursue fairly earnestly the collection of Robert Ferguson of Raith up in Scotland. So this is sort of north and east of Edinburgh on the north side of the Firth of Forth. This was a very fine Scottish collection with a lot of important sort of European and world specimens in it. But the family didn't want to sell. And Arthur tried through various different routes and different contacts over a long period of time to acquire that. In 1942, now that he had really sort of made his mark and was recognised for his capabilities and his knowledge, he was invited by the Royal Institution of Cornwall to reorganise the Rashley Gallery at the Royal Museum of Cornwall. What we see today is still broadly in line with Arthur's work. And then in 1944, his elder brother Charles died, and he succeeded to the title as 6th Baronet. Unfortunately, it was a bittersweet moment because with that came a crippling bill for death duties, and it really nearly bankrupted the estate. But you know, he weathered the storm. A way was found to move forward, and life carried on. Now, shortly after the Second World War, there was interest in trying to revive the Cornish mining industry. And Arthur got involved in the reopening of New Consul's mine at Luckett near Stoke Climsland. And again, this was an aspect of his life that I had no knowledge of at all. And he actually sat on the board as technical director for a while as part of this project team. And in 1948, he was appointed as director of the excursion to Devon and Cornwall for the long-delayed International Geological Congress, which was a huge conference that was held in London, a couple of thousand delegates. And again, on that occasion, he hosted a visit to Swallowfield for some of the delegates to see his mineral collection. Later that year, he was awarded the Bolitho Medal by the Royal Geological Society of Cornwall, so really in recognition of his huge contributions to Cornish geology and mineralogy. And then something must have changed, because in 1949, he struck up some correspondence with Lawrence Wager, who was taking over as professor at Oxford, to say that he was wondering whether he could give his collection to Oxford University. Now, bear in mind that back in 1936, he'd pretty much agreed it was going to go to the British Museum. So exactly what the background to that was, it's very difficult to work out. I've gone into it in some detail in the book, but we'll move on for now because we don't have the time this morning. And then later that year, he also purchased a good chunk of specimens from the Williams collection at Burn Coos. And some of you will be familiar with the Williams family through Courtney Smale's work and his wonderful article in Rec. And so these were really prime Cornish minerals, arsenates, phosphates, and the like. So we're now entering a period which is almost, we're coming to the beginning of the end. In 1953, there was an unfortunate incident where Arthur was going to the assistance of someone who'd crashed into the wall of the estate, and he drove out of one gate along the public road to go back in at the other gate in his old lorry, which was not insured. And unfortunately, he got stopped by the police. And as a result of that, he was told that he would have his license taken away unless he sat a test. And I guess it was a question of pride. And he basically said, well, I'm not prepared to do that. And so he gave up driving, and that severely limited his sort of abilities to get around and to go out and do field collecting. Later that year, he was awarded the Henwood Medal, also from the Royal Geological Society of Cornwall. So he had the two top medals from the RGSC. And in 1954, he hosted another garden party at Swallowfield. And a rather nice touch here was that as people arrived, they were offered one of these wheel coat pseudomorphs, cassiterite after orthoclase. And remarkably, a little cluster of these came up for sale just as the book was going to press. Unfortunately, they were rather too expensive for me to acquire, but I would love to have had one with the ticket. So things moved on, and in 1954, he went back over the ground with Oxford University and signed up to a deal, exactly as he'd done with the British Museum, that they would take the whole of the collection that would be kept in perpetuity, known as the Arthur Russell collection. And, the die seemed cast that it was going to go to Oxford. And one wonders exactly what the background to that was. There's some of the ideas that I worked through are in the book. But the following year, in 1955, he wavered, and he went back to the British Museum, sought an appointment with Sir Gavin de Beer, who was the then director, and asked would they be prepared to offer the terms of the agreement as set out by him back in the 1930s. And Sir Gavin de Beer suggested, of course, we would be very happy to take the collection. And so he changed his mind. But at the same time, Wager at Oxford, in sort of recognition and gratitude, said to the authorities at Oxford it would be nice to offer Sir Arthur an honorary doctorate. And it was agreed by the council of the university that would be a good thing to do. And so in 1956, he was offered and accepted an honorary DSc from the University of Oxford, in full knowledge that he had agreed that his collection was going to go to the NHM. So his mind must have been in something of a turmoil at that time. In 1957, one of his specimens was used to describe the mineral cornubite, which was presented as a paper at Minsock jointly by Claringbull and Hay. And in 1958, this lower photo on the right, you can see Arthur in the centre, and the lady on his right arm is Inoni Rashley, a descendant of the Rashley family, or Philip Rashley fame. And she was a great confidant and support to him in his later years. And she used to act as his chauffeur, driving him around Cornwall mineral collecting. So I think that's possibly the last significant field trip that he actually made. And we're now starting to approach what I've called the final countdown. He was not a well man. He had a stomach ulcer. Life was becoming difficult. The relationship with his third wife was really less than satisfactory. And he started to make a determined effort to put his affairs in order, to start disposing of surplus material, and large numbers of duplicate specimens, we're talking hundreds, possibly thousands, were sold to the British Museum. Arthur died at Swallowfield, aged 85 in 1964, and there was a small private family funeral at Reading Crematorium with a brief obituary published in the Times. And then subsequently, in March, a memorial service was held at St Paul's in Knightsbridge, which was attended mostly by people from the mineral world, the museum, and some of his environmental friends. Now, at that time, Christopher Russell, his third son, was a practicing solicitor. He was also the executor for the estate, and so he had to handle all the preparations, the documentation, and so on, in terms of getting probate. And once that was in place, he contacted the Natural History Museum and said, "Okay, you can come and get the collection whenever it suits you." And two young men, Bob Symes, who you saw right at the beginning of the talk, and John Fuller, were dispatched to spend 9 weeks at Swallowfield, carefully packing the collection ready for transport. And of course, back in these days, we're talking about newspaper and cotton waste and sort of general natural packing materials, no bubble wrap. And there was an abundance of ammunition boxes knocking around post-Second World War. So this was the preferred transport medium. So once it was all crated up, a big removal lorry was sent down to Swallowfield, and it arrived at the museum on the 14th of September, 1964. And from there, a whole new chapter opens, and we'll go on to look at some of that in a moment. But just missing Arthur's demise was the publication of a new copper iron arsenate from Cornwall named Arthurite, jointly for Sir Arthur Russell and his great friend, the late Arthur Kingsbury, published in Mag by Davis and Hay. And so in the lower right here, this is a pretty early picture of the cabinets when they were moved into the Russell Room at the Natural History Museum. Now, before we go on to look at the collection in some detail, I just wanted to include a few pictures of Arthur in the field, and these are very few in number. In the upper left-hand corner, we have Russell and Claringle, who waded out offshore on a particularly low tide to Wherry Mine. This is off Penzance. The one in the lower left, I particularly like this. This is him looking rather smart and very happy with life. Gabardine raincoat, breeches, walking boots, long socks, pipe and trilby. And this is almost certainly taken on the International Geological Congress visit to southwest England, and I think it's at Cheesering Quarry near Wheal Phoenix. And the one on the right I got some years ago from Arthur Kingsbury's widow, Philippa Kingsbury. This is taken probably by Kingsbury, digging for pyramorphite up in Lead Hills in Lanarkshire. So the Russell Room, this is as it looked a few years ago. It doesn't look much different now. It has the feel of an inner sanctum. It really does feel like somewhere that is very special. And the material, the specimens, the cabinets just exude history. And it's a wonderful place to go and work. One of the things that Christopher Russell asked for when he signed over the collection to the museum back in 1964 was that when they had got it arranged, he would like to go and see it. And that never happened. And once I'd sort of built up a relationship with Christopher in the process of working on the book, this transpired. And I said to him, well, we'll sort that out. And so I arranged with Mike Rumsey, who you see on the left of the picture here, for Christopher to come up, and we gave him a real VIP day. And he was just as happy as Larry, just to see everything so beautifully set out. And he really, knew quite a lot about the collection. He knows his basic minerals, and it was a joy to actually put that right after a passage of a very long time. Here's Robin Hanson, who some of you will know. She's the current curator of gems and minerals at the NHM, and this is one of her favourite drawers, beautiful Cumbrian calcites. And there are lots and lots of these in the collection. Now, downstairs in the museum, in Earth's Treasury, these two cabinets have recently been refurbished by Robin and redisplayed. So we've got rid of the horrible black plastic grid, and it looks a whole lot better. And it gives you a very good insight to the quality of the material to be seen in the Russell collection. Now, one of the things I wanted to do as part of the project was to get some understanding of the makeup of the collection, both from a mineralogical point of view, but also a geographical point of view, and to see whether I could make any sense of where his interests were going at a particular time. And there's plenty more work that could be done in that area. But one of the interesting things is to look at the species diversity. And you can see here that fluorite, calcite, barite, and cassiterite account for a huge proportion of the total. So this is the top 20 species represented in the collection, and we're here at about 25% of the total collection in 4 species. And so I think most of you, if asked, might have said, oh, well, he liked fluorite, didn't he? He certainly did. The geographical makeup, perhaps not too surprising, but it took a lot of work to get this data. So the bulk of it is from England. So England, as in England, Scotland, Wales, not the United Kingdom. There's about 20% of it doesn't really have any satisfactory locality data. And this is just a reflection that there was an awful lot of stuff and that Arthur didn't keep up with his curation. And from Scotland, about 7%. The Republic of Ireland, similar, a little bit less from Wales, and hardly anything from Northern Ireland. And the reason that the Republic of Ireland features so strongly is that he had family connections out there through his sister Chloe marrying the Guinness family. And he made quite a number of trips over a long period of years to Ireland, particularly interested in the metamorphic minerals and also the wavellite. So if we look at how that varied over time, his collecting really didn't get going until about 1904. And blue, the big, the bottom bar is England, and you can see chance of green there. So this is trips to Scotland. Interestingly, these 2 trips is obviously in the First World War. So these were Ministry of Munitions trips. And again, he was back up in Scotland in the 1930s. The Republic of Ireland, so we have a trip here and another big trip here, and then again here and over here. So it's pretty clear that his interest, he would pick up some particular theme and he would follow it. The underlying trend is that he was in Cornwall and Devon almost every year. Now, the other thing that was really quite interesting to try and pull out was the impact of the acquired collections, so the old collections from which he selected the very best, compared to the material that he collected himself. And it is these acquired collection specimens really that push back in time his reach. And that's one of the reasons that the collection is so outstanding in terms of the quality and the variety of material. And so you can see here that in quite a number of years, the acquired collections dwarf what he acquired himself. And that's really, that again was a lot of work to do that analysis and actually pull the information out of the labels, but quite interesting to see that. And overall, about half of the collection was collected by himself and half came from old collections. So I'd like just now to share a little bit of the methodology with you, just so that you have some appreciation of where did the information and the stories come from. So the first thing was to do a complete trawl of the physical collection and to go through and capture any information on specimen labels or bits of paper that are accompanying specimens that might not have made their way into the database. And so that was a very big task undertaken over a number of weeks, over a period of a couple of years, to go through and gather all that information. And then the second strand was a whole pile of documentation that was rescued from Swallowfield by John Fuller and Bob Symes, known as the Russell Archive. And this was a tremendous resource for me. And it's basically scraps of paper on the reverse of which Arthur had written some mineralogical notes, and that's why they survive. And this might be letters from the bank, laundry bills, things to do with land ownership and so on. And so in many cases, as a biographer, what it was written on was more interesting than what he'd written on the back. And then, of course, a large part of any mineral book is photos, and all of these photos had to be taken, especially for the project. They were taken on site at the Natural History Museum, so that meant taking all my equipment in. And from several weeks of work, once I'd selected the specimens, I came up with 450 final images from about 6,000 that I'd taken, different backgrounds, lighting, and so on. And those are the ones that you actually see in making it mine. Sometimes there was a need to be a little bit inventive. This is a capped quartz from Virtuous Lady Mine, and I wanted to show this as if it was docking its cap. So I made a little stand, and that was the finished result. So really, really quite pleased with that. So it's not photoshopped in terms of positioning it, but I have just wiped out the wire that's supporting the top. So now let's have a look at some of the fine specimens in his collection. And I wanted to start with this one. It's a beautiful Cumbrian calcite from Stank Mine, which at that time was in Lancashire. And this one is identifiable as being from his mother's collection, and she got it from John Graves. But really a beautiful piece in very fine condition. Cornwall and Devon were perhaps Arthur's first love, so we're going to have a few of those. This one, bismuthinite, very stout crystals with nice striations down the prism faces from Foey Consols, and this one from Alfred Fox's collection, and a good sort of fist specimen. And these very characteristic of the locality, sort of candle wax type chalcedony from Penandrea Mine. This is from the William Semmons collection. And an absolutely stunning chalcocite from Isaac Walker's collection. This one 7 centimetres tall, and that really is one of my favourite mineral specimens ever. This one from the Baroness Burdett Coutts collection. It's a noticeably heavy piece of copper, really fine crystallisation from the Rilistian mine, which some of you will know is well known for its chloritic conglomerate with the cassiterite in. And this one from John Ruskin's collection. John Ruskin was a Victorian critic and author and all-round polymath, very interested in minerals and geology. And most of his specimens tended to be aesthetic. He wasn't perhaps particularly technical, but he very much liked colours and contrasts and things that were very nice to look at. And this one, a single large blue fluorite cube with a couple of smaller ones on iron-stained quartz from Cambrai. And here's another one from Ruskin's collection, also from Cambrai Mine. And you can just see the drama in this of the pink-tinged edges, sort of the purple-tinged edges, the colourless cubes sitting on the dark red and white quartz. A very dramatic in appearance. This one came from the collection of Edward Wilton Newton. He was an instrument maker down in Cornwall, made surveying dials and that sort of thing. And this is a very nice example of what's known as horsetooth siderite. There's a particularly large one in one of the war cases at the NHM, which came from John Lavin of Penzance. And Arthur really, really wanted this specimen, and he spent some time prizing this out of the Newton family after the death of its owner. The Williams family we've talked about briefly. Cuprite specimens don't get much better than this. It's in beautiful condition. It's clearly been kept in the dark for most of its life. You can see the body colour coming through and the complex morphology of the crystals. A very nice specimen and attributed to Richard Talling, very famous Cornwall dealer. We must include some arsenates and phosphates. So here's a limonite from Will Gorland. This is from the John Stackhouse Pendarvis collection. And he had some very nice material from that collection. And Will Gorland, some of you perhaps know these blue fluorites. They're instantly recognisable, very unusual colour, also from the Stackhouse Pendarvis collection, 7 by 6 centimetres. And the area around East Pool Mine, well known for these nice chalcopyrites on siderite. This one from the David Bain collection I mentioned, the family that are based up in Scotland didn't escape Arthur's attention, and in fact he had some very good contacts up at Wanlock Head and Lead Hills. And this comes from John Weir's collection. And what you have are large, lustrous, very dark brown crystals of sphalerite, overgrown by brassy metallic chalcopyrite, and then sort of a dusting over the top of druzy colourless quartz crystals. So very nice specimen indeed. J.J. Cousins, well known for his collection of West Cumberland minerals, very nice calcites, and quite a number of the calcites in the Russell collection come from Cousins' collection. So here we've got this nice twin from Big Rig and tinged pinkish red by Intype. One of the things that Arthur was particularly good at was developing relationships with miners, so that if something was found, his contact was quite likely to be the person that opened the hole and would therefore put some pieces on one side for him. And this is a really unusual suite of millerite crystals from Bolsburn Mine in County Durham. I didn't even know millerite occurred there until I opened the box and saw these. And they're really quite substantial. The largest group's nearly 4 centimetres long and noticeably heavy in the hand. Bolsburn Mine, of course, is well known for its fine sort of wine purpley fluorite crystals, and this one illustrates very nicely the stepped faces that you commonly see on some of these. And there's about 100 steps from the apex there to the edge of that crystal face. Very, very nicely demonstrated in that photograph. Now, we all know that fluorite is cubic, right? Well, here's a fluorite specimen that isn't cubic. It's very, very elongated on one axis. And this again came to him as a result of Mr. Madison, the manager, being friendly with Russell. And once this thing was found, it was put on one side for the next time that Arthur was visiting the mine. Now, in the Lake District, he visited many different localities, but Greenside Mine he seemed to have a particular soft spot for. And there's a very nice suite of material from Greenside Mine, mostly simple minerals, calcite, chalcopyrite, galena. And this one, you can see fairly bright intergrown crystals of galena overgrown by this lovely pale yellow calcite. The barium carbonates were a particular interest of Arthur's. This is witherite, an outstanding specimen in beautiful condition. And this comes from New Bransmith Colliery in the Durham coalfield. And the situation here was that there was a mineral vein of barium mineralization, barite and witherite. It was intersected by the coal workings, and the mining company decided that they would work the barium mineralization as well as the coal, and they worked it in parallel. And so there was a rather confused setup of passageways and adits and so on, of which Arthur was very critical. He thought it was most unminer-like, and he thought they should have sunk a new shaft and worked the barium minerals independently. Rotherhope Fell Mine, another very well-known and famous locality in the North Pennines, particularly striking zoning, nicely exhibited in this example here. And this came from Herbert Harrison, again, someone who worked at the mine, keeping an eye out for Arthur. And also from Rotherhope Fell, this one from Herbert Millican, who was someone who he was friendly with. And this is just a very unusual but particularly nice calcite specimen. And I mentioned St. Peter's Mine earlier on, and his find from the extreme end of the workings, and he must have just doggedly worked at this cavity for some hours, I think late into the night, and extracted everything he could. Very, very nice. And Virtuous Lady Mine we talked about earlier, this one from the Edmund Pierce collection, these very characteristic chalky white crystals of quartz, generally with an overgrowth of little lenticular tan-coloured siderite. And of course, the other thing which Virtuous Lady Mine is famous for are these boxes, these epimorphs of siderite after possibly fluorite, yet to be fully explained by anyone that's looked at them. Back up in Wanlock Head, mirror bright galenas, very characteristic of that mining area. This one personally collected by Arthur in 1918, so that would be while he was working for the Ministry of Munitions. And another one from New Glen Creek Mine in Wanlock Head. So we have a core here of sphalerite surrounded by creamy coxcomb barite. This one collected by Robert Brown, one of his contacts at the mine. And so we come to the Ferguson collection. This is an outstandingly good lanakite from Susanna Mine. And interestingly, this was acquired by Arthur prior to his main thrust of trying to acquire the Ferguson collection. He visited Viscount Novar and was obviously putting out some feelers, was told, no, it's not for sale. But Viscount Novar, presumably thinking, well, he's a nice chap, said to him, but of course, if you would like to select a few, that would be fine. And so Arthur chose about a dozen specimens, and he chose extremely well, this being one of them. We talked earlier about the amount of calcite in the collection. I'm just going to put a few of these in. So these beautiful West Cumberland calcites. It was generally the case, back in these days that people were not too bothered about the locality, and so generally you may only get Cumberland or maybe Egremont or Frizzington, and that's as much as you can actually ascertain with certainty. The next specimen is a particularly nice pale blue bearite from the Frizzington area, probably also from the J.J. Cousins collection, one of the very nicest examples from the area. And here's a pale yellow one, beautifully transparent, chisel-ended prismatic bearites, possibly from Mowbray or Parkside mine. But as I said earlier, sometimes it's just not possible to say with certainty what the locality is for some of these older specimens. The next one is from Ireland, Laharan Quarry, a famous locality for wavellite. And this is somewhere that Russell put a lot of effort into tracking down. He enlisted local help, made a number of visits, and has a couple of drawers full of really nice specimens of wavellite from this famous old locality. And also from Ireland, really nice cadmium yellow smithsonites from Cheshire Donnell East mine. This used to be quite easy to collect, and obviously when Russell went, there must have been quite a lot of it on the ground. There's very little to see at the locality now. And another Irish speciality, native sulphur, which occurs in sort of kernels in cavities in the Carboniferous limestone across quite a wide area of Ireland, is really quite interesting, possibly due to the reduction of evaporite nodules. It's really a project that needs doing by someone with some instrumental analysis. And back to Cornwall for excuse me, a beautiful chalcophyllite specimen is sort of sharp hexagonal platy crystals in the matrix. It was recorded originally as being from Wheel Unity. Russell changed it to Wheel Gorland. Yeah, whether that's a valid thing to do, who knows? But either way, it's a nice specimen of the species. And a lovely example here from the Johnson Orbin collection down at Plymouth Museum of sort of a nodule of clinoclase, a very dark blue material, overgrown by azurite and malachite, and with a very recognisable label from that collection. Leuroconite, Russell very much like leuroconite. He got a drawer of specimens of leuroconite from many old collections, and this is a particularly nice one from the Richard Davey collection of Boken House. And I think our last mineral picture today is this wonderful fluorite with these interesting, slightly stepped and beveled edges to the cubes, also from Wheel Gorland from the George Croker Fox collection. And before I finish, I really need to say some thank yous. I'm not going to read all of that, but I'll just leave it there for a few seconds so that you get some sense of the number of people who've been involved in the project. And I'd particularly like to mention Mike Rumsey, Robin Hanson, Austin Woodridge, Andrea Hart, Helen Pethers and their colleagues at the NHM, because without access to the collection and the archives, I really couldn't have done this. And of course, Christopher Russell, who's really the star of the show and has been able to add so much from his fantastic memory and his recollections of growing up at Swallowfield Park. So thank you to everybody, and I hope that you found that interesting. If you'd like to know more about Sir Arthur Russell, then I guess it's permissible for me to give a little plug for the book. This is the cover. It's a substantial volume, 430 large format pages, 754 illustrations and over 1,000 references, and a good comprehensive index. It's £40 plus shipping, and you can order it direct from my website. If you're based in the USA, Gloria Stabler of Lithography up in Denver has copies, and also Ian Bruce at the Tucson Fine Mineral Gallery if you're down in Tucson. So please do support them as local distributors. And thank you very much for listening. And if you've got any questions, I'll be very happy to help.